بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اسمحوا لي طبعا ارحب بحضراتكم النهارده في المؤتمر الصحفي اللي بيعقد بعد اجتماع مجلس الوزراء. والحقيقه يمكن يعني انا وجدت هذا الموضوع فرصه جيده جدا ان احنا نعرض بالتفصيل مخرجات الاجتماع الاول للمجلس الاعلى للاستثمار اللي شرفنا برئاسه فخامه الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي له امبارح بعد اعاده تشكيل المجلس. والحقيقه هذا الاجتماع كان شديد الاهميه والتوقيت الخاص بيه توقيت مناسب جدا عشان يعني الحقيقه فخامه الرئيس الحقيقه بدا بتعليق مهم جدا للدوله المصريه.
A very important comment that the Egyptian state is in a turning point and we are in need all relative entities in the state to work in a very important which is the increase in the participation of the private sector to the national project made by the state and it should be review for all the regulative measurement laws, administrative measurement for one aim to attract the most volume of investors and encourage the private sector to start to be a pioneer with the state. In fact, what I'm going to brief you is based on the directives of Mr. President that the Egyptian government, we worked in several resolution and decrees. In fact, the conference was a good opportunity to review what the state made, specifically starting from May 2020 till now, and to explore the recommendations or proposals issued by the cabinet yesterday, or the council actually, and it was made by the relevant states and helped me to come out with the participation of the private sector based on the several meetings we've convened, whether in the cabinet level, with all the private sector constitutions, the investors associations, chambers, investors councils, and we listen to all the challenges faced by the investors based on the outcomes. Allow me to explore with you in brief what we have agreed upon, and Mr. President, based on such resolutions being adopted and agreed upon, directives the government clearly to put a timetable and to specify in each resolution which relevant entities to execute, and will be in a focus in the upcoming period on the periodic meeting of the councils, and according to the resolutions will be every 3 months, but based on the directives of Mr. President to convene monthly to follow up the execution of the resolutions and other resolutions. We think that would assist in increasing the attractive of the investors. The point I'd like to emphasize was to be explained before the Egyptian citizen that before us that they grant would show the development of the investment volume by the state combined with the private sector starting from 2005 till now. And I wish to tell you something that's very important for you and for all the Egyptians. We were in 2005 and 6 that the total investments with the state and the private was 115.7 million Egyptian pounds, but in the upcoming year 2023-2024 the suggested investment will be 1,740,000,000 Egyptian pounds. Mostly throughout this period we've increased 15th double of the investment, and this require to be all aware of it, that the Egyptian state and the escalated population wouldn't be acceptable to continue in the same pace. And Otherwise, we would be having lots of problems in everything, such as infrastructures, services, and everything that we need for the state to grow up. So, to look up in the overview of the curve, you find that the investments throughout 10 years within a very slow pace, and followed that, the curve started to come up and to be elevated, not only because of the private sector's participation was limited, but for the state had to increase its investments with large numbers. We were very much concerned about the very circumstances and turbulence started from 2011 and 2015, followed by circumstances faced by the whole world, such as the COVID-19 and the Ukrainian war. So it was naturally for the private sector was fear to inflow big investments in a high speed. But measurements made by the state to inflow investment to compensate the shortage of private sector's participation and to increase job opportunities and employment. But our focus as the Supreme Council of Investment, how for the private sector to increase their investment to be equal to the state's efforts and maybe more. We've targeted that, started from 3 years ago, that total investment will be 60 to 55% for the private sectors only. We've proposed that the private sectors in the Egypt, with respect to the size of facilities, is taking the large share, which is naturally we have 3,750,000 entities or establishment. All the 75% works for the private sector. We found that the total domestic total at 75% is included, but the problem that most of them are unofficial, and 60% work for the sales and we say that should be for the production sectors such as industry and agriculture. But the challenge is only 1% of the private sector that export, means that 99% is only cover the domestic market. And how could we encourage the private sector? And that will be the work of the Supreme Council for investment, hopefully to be presided by Mr. President. As state, we've already presented and took very important measures. Within 1 year, we've made the state sovereignty draft adopted by Mr. President at the last of December, and how to enable the private sector to increase their contributions. For us, with an economic constitution for the state to work upon, we've expanded to issue the golden license. Was there in the article of the 2017, only 15 companies being permitted in addition to other companies and corporations. And you may see that one of the directives, that the first resolutions would be only for the strategic and mega projects. So the recommendation to expand to issue the golden license for many and several projects. A part of the important demands and inflation and the increase of the rate for the industry and the agriculture sectors would be having an initiative from the state. You remember we've made an initiative of 150 billion Egyptian pound, and the investor or the private sectors to take only 5% or and the state's cost will be about 16 billion in Egyptian pound to bear the difference of the rates, and we've added the tourism to be the total is 160 billion Egyptian pound. We've exempted 60 real estate or industrial sector, and the state will be taken over, and the unit of investors started to look for the demands, problems, and we've received 1,500 complaints being tackled, 70% of which were for the interest and the benefit of the investors. We've already made the degree of the competition neutrality, and we've already launched the national strategy for the intellectual property. And a committee for the conflict settlement were reactivated, headed by the Minister of Justice, and we are working strongly to follow up all the issued decrees to be executed in the ground. We've already made radical reforms regarding the allocation of the industrial land to be or to have a very fixed price for the industrial land or areas, and all the goes to for the development authority for an industry to be only allowed to look after such demands through a central committee for any foreign and big investor to be allocated by the committee. All this made before. We've said under all circumstances 20 days, 20 working days only to issue the license, and there is a great improvement for that. Maybe we will not have reached yet the 20 days, but the time being minimized, and our goal to go even below to the 20 days. And the last thing that showed up during or through the Egyptian stock, which is the issuance of the first fund for gold investment, for the investors to pump their money in this, and we've laid out a very clear mechanism. But proposals and decrees been issued that before or yesterday, we've already looked out the problems they face, and we found specifically we've trailed the path of any investor starting to get into the country and start a project. So their challenges we found in the following 4 points: the establishment of corporations, the allocation of land, the license of the activity, and the operation of their project. Therefore, we've issued 22 decrees directed by Mr. President to have a timetable to identify the executed entity and followed by to be executed. With regard to the allocation of the corporation, will be having an amendment of the executive law to contribute and encourage the expansion of establishing the private free zones for the foreign investors to deal with the banks during the establishment time and period. There were obstacles, but for the first moment, for the foreign investor, once they submit, they deal with it. And as you can see at the schedule before you, who is going to define the timetable, and you'll find in each resolution will be before it, the entity and the timetable. And the second resolution to amend the Article 43 of investment to encourage industries based on the natural gas as an input of a production, so if they can enjoy the private free zones to be made. A number of the world corporations wanted to do petrochemicals company based on the free zone system, and that was stopped before. But thanks God, the state has a clear map and a vision for the natural gas, and that will enable us to the Supreme Council of Energy and their approvals, and would be have the right to make a free zone. Will be the issue will be amended. The approvals for establishing corporation, that was through complaints. Some would say if I get the approval from different entities will take months, but now we've laid out that the maximum date is 10 working days only. Once the corporation, the foreign investor, or even the local investor wish to establish a corporation based on different demands, will require an approval. But the maximum now to get the approval is 10 working days. But even the entity or the relevant entity did not respond, so will be have the approval. Fourth, to have an electronic or portal for the investment authority. We used to talk about the one window thing, and everything will be automated and online. To have operation and dissolving the project and to be all linked together for the company to submit their papers online. In fact, we've put a set of measures regarding the land allocation. They were saying that any contracts previously the state made that should be committed, provided that the investor never object any pressures and to escalate the process of registration due to, say, complaints of somebody or some entities. Some used to say that we had 20 years for registering their land, and we let the real estate to be committed, provided there is no breach of it. And it is importantly to open for the or to be open for the foreigners to own real estate in Egypt, but due to the previous measurement, they had only a maximum of 2 in different 2 cities, but now Minister of Justice will work with the relevant body to launch that unlimited real estate to be owned by the foreigners, as long as there are regulations and they pay the fees with the free currency, whether they need to own 5 to 20, so they would have the right to any number of the real estate. With respect to the permission of exercising the activity, so made us not to just let for the golden license to the mega projects, but we think as state may expand the license, the golden permissions, whether for the local nor or the foreign investors. Some companies said that the law, whoever is using, whichever is using, enjoying the getting the permission or the golden will be after the issue of the investment law. some would say to give us the space to open, no matter when the establishment being or the entities were established before or after the law. And the other point, another regulative one, and there were several complaints for the state to have a vision to study the state entities responsible of monitoring or regulating the performance of utilities and services, i.e., if we have an regulative entities for specific utilities, so it is supposedly and naturally this body should be followed differently from the state. We will study these entities in order to enable us to make the measurement accordingly. For the cabinet to be separate and the regulative entity will be isolated. And the other part, which is very important, based in a demand from the private sector to have an equal in treatment. There were some legal articles to give preference for some companies vis-à-vis the private sector. We've agreed upon to have the amendment, so there will be all equal, private sector equal to the state entities to be treated the same. And the other point, which is very important in the framework of activating the offering program and selling the state assets, to say clearly the issue that there are several entities owned by the state. We found that such an entity owned by 10 to 12 state entities. You might find some entity chaired by the state. So if we can to put some with fees in a set of measurements and very red tape ones, we agreed upon to issue a decree to establish a unit affiliated to the cabinet to gather all the entities and to take or to make the committed resolutions. So in order to avoid to go through several entities during the upcoming period, there are some measurements by the assistance of the Ministry of Finance to publish all the state resolution to fostering the governance. The amendment in a very important article regarding the operations for the foreign investors to allow them to be registered in the suppliers register, even if they don't have an Egyptian nationality. What it was in the past, in order to register to be registered to import the production requirement that the company would be having only the 51% or to have the national or the Egyptian nationality. No matter their nationality, they have to be registered and to start the importation of the requirements production. This was based on the private sector vision. There is no state entity, and we've seen this before, to be issued in a comprehensive resolution. Any country cannot issue any regulative measurement to add more burden or change any fees or in return of services, unless based on the investment law to go and get the approval from the investment authority, from the cabinet and from the Supreme Council of Investment presided by Mr. President, in order to avoid increasing more burdens for the investors. And the other important point to to draft a resolution, a regulative resolution to clarify the standards of imposing a return of incentive. There was no clarity, or rather a return of improving services. So the Minister of Justice would draw the law based on that to be published for everyone. And the other part, which was one of most or the frequent complaints by the investors, that I supposed to set of taxes. In the meantime, I have dues from the states did not take. So they were agreed upon to made and directed the Ministry of Finance to be activated for the investors, even if they do have investment, to do some sort of sharing and to make the state and what is left for them to take it. What was in the past, you cannot start to pay your tax and then you get your entitlement. So based on the resolution to make the relevant settlement. The other thing, within 3 months for the Minister for Justice to draw up a document for the state tax policies for the 5 or 10 years to come. Some investors would have some sort of uncertainty for the vision, but for the announced document within 3 months to say the state policy of taxes for 5 to 10 years to come. Also, the amendment of the profit amendment between the private sector and the state company for paying the tax. Some amendments have already made them, and God willing to be adopted and approved by the House of Representatives. With respect to the facilitation, we used to say that there is a mechanism, once we have a settlement, to be presented before the judiciary for the economic courts. Based on their law, they made a maximum limit for the settlement or a conflict. Some would say if we have 100,000 Egyptian pounds, if it was increased, it will be moved or referred to the Supreme Court. But today, 100,000 as a figure, it's in a very moderate one. So, based on the demand to change the law, to encourage the investment to do the settlement to be for or to be preferred to the economic courts. All the compensations regarding to this obsess the lands or real estate, so the state is committed to within 3 months to settle it down, and it is also approved, but to get the assistance of the International Bank to lay out a vision with us and to promote for Egypt lately, based on the directive of Mr. President, to get the assistance of the foreign consultation offices such as the ARC and the International Bank, and some other laws being amendment regarding the economic zones such as the Suez Canal to increase incentives and their attractions, and also to establish a permanent unit, the emerging or the startups. They said that we are actually sort of that lost, and we didn't know where to go to work with them. So we agreed upon to be having a permanent unit within the cabinet presided by the investment authority and membership of some other related entities to receive all the demands and to finish it within 1 month. We've already also adopted and worked on a set of incentives for the agriculture sectors. Will be expanded on the pricing stock, but the orientation for all types of agricultures, such as the pricing stock and the contractual farming with respect to the housing sector and the real estate, based on their complaint, we've been adopted primarily that to be 1 point for the investor or the real estate agency to endorsement the price based on the rate, but the rate has been increased. We've agreed upon that within 10 or 2 years, we'll take only 10%. And the other part, we've already extended the time or the periods of executions 20% to be executed. They used to complain about the price of the cement and other materials for constructions, and he was very restrict about the timetable. So we've already exceeded the timetable with 20% more. So they have. So it will be give them some sort of free with the process of execution. We used, as been stated, that the project is fully executed when they achieve 90% of it. So we've already lowered it down to 80%. And a number or another number or a set of incentives to facilitate before the real estate agency to be presented for the Supreme Council for Investment regarding the industry sector. Based on the directives of Mr. President, it will be having a set of measurements to have some sort of exemptions and of custom fees that are today for specific industry to be paid in the new zones that to be established or to be encouraged. I mean that the Minister of Industry to specify a set of activities and industries through which will be enjoying tax exemption and other regulative fees. And I wish to tell you that we've already started that today, for the first one to produce the green hydrogen. In all cases, that was another thing that adopted that the industrial project, whoever to take a land to establish an industrial project would allow them to already to pay the first endorsement and will be having 2 years permission to establish their plant, and the rest of the land price will be paid later on. And another measurement based on the industrial main complaint that the license of operating their plants to be within 5 years, and therefore to be operative without any problems, without having the measurement of the renewal every year. The other thing is the producing the green hydrogen. So we'll start some of industrial incentives to activate a similar incentives for all investment projects, not only for the green hydrogen, and that before you will be have a response till the 55% of the income tax, followed by an exemption for the equipment and the raw materials from the added tax or the VAT. I mean, all these incentives will be within this issue with respect to the transportation sector, that the logistic zones project will enjoy all the incentives laid out in the investment law. There will be some sort of a unification of pricing. Also to expand the white list for the industrial and exporters to enjoy all the incentives proposed and adopted in the meeting of the council. But most importantly, it's not important to issue decrees, but it is most importantly to be executed in the ground. So that's why we are committed based on the timetable, and they will be responsible to follow up until the meeting of the Supreme Council will have agreed upon that will be having periodic meetings to follow up the execution until we'll get the convene of the consumption. We'll be having more size or volume of execution. Sorry for taking too long, and if you have any questions, I'll be free to answer. Greeting to you, Mr. Premier. We're talking about a very real and revolutionary resolutions. As you've ended up with all the incentives that some resolutions would require monitoring and follow-up for protection. The state has taken a very great resolutions and will be praised, but the time of execution will have some notes. Maybe for the investors, particularly the private sector, will review that they are great, but we are waiting for a follow-up and monitoring mechanism by the government. Thank you. It is clearly the assignment and the orientation, the direction through the very vast debate lasted for about 5 years to discuss the mechanism of execution in order to have a sustainable mechanism for follow-up and to assure you every. I wish to talk about an issue of the 22 decree made by the state. Even though they encouraged the local and foreign investors would face in each step of the aforementioned thing, we wish you to have a self-assured message to you, to the investor, if there any measurement regarding the profit, and the other part is the provision of the currency through which rumors will start to emerge in order to clarify the projects or the measures made by the Egyptian state. Thanks. And as said by Mr. Premier, that all proposals made by the societal debate with the private sector, and the private sector of Egypt is the ambassador of Egypt. With regarding the currency, the foreign currency, as you all know, it's a very temporary issue based on the geopolitical circumstances that made some sort of a pressure of the foreign currency by increasing the main goods prices. So what we've done in order to increase such current money, our resources, the state made many things. Firstly, we talk about things on the short, long, and the middle long. Firstly, the tourism revenues increased 25%, Suez Canal 30%, our the portion exportation has minimized for 30%. And the second thing is the foreign investors. We're talking about the offering programs, whether in the Egyptian stock or strategic offering. These are resources to increase the US dollar resources. And therefore, we have some sort of a balance of the foreign currency market. One more thing, the cabinet also agreed upon on the investment expenditure. They have some sort of a regulation on it, because it is a component of US dollar. So we've already minimized the expenditure for this current fiscal year and the upcoming fiscal year. This year we're talking about 20%, and the following year, due to the national project, will be having an offering for the company of water treatment. We've already received 200 demands from 30 foreign countries to do so. So we've already saved the state expenditures, and because it is the state orientation is to have more participation of the private sector. So in the meantime, we'll pave the way, whether they are foreign or local investors, to inflow their foreign investment. In the meantime, they play the role the state used to do before, such as expanding the Haya Karima project or the decentralized. So in order to save our role and make it for the private sector to do so. Thank you, Minister. I'd like to emphasize things said by Dr. Hala. The Egyptian state, even of the very early months, we've never had any problems for the investor to exit their profits. Let me remind you that in the mid of the crisis in March, the Egyptian state allowed to exit 21 billion Egyptian US dollar mentioned by the foreign investors, by the hot money, in order to say that the state do not make any restraints for exiting their money. As you all know, that several countries prevented the taking their money out, named as the hot money. But due to the issue is that the Egyptian state is very full to let them freely exit their profits money. But due to the shortage of some resources, we've made some sort of priority table. As I said before, we have some targets in the issue of offering, whether they are in the stock or for the Egyptian or the foreign investors. But God willing, in a very short while will be announced the execution of a large amount of offerings. We've already started a number of such companies, and Mr. Minister already mentioned what have been offered from the Egyptian company of communication, and another company such as Backing Company is one of 32 companies that finished their measurements. And the relevant ministers will review the file before me. We are working on it. I'd like to self-assure the Egyptians that we are seriously working on it, that the Egyptian status, God willing, will be enabled to fill the US dollar gap. And I say that every month our commitments, our expenditure, our resources, and the gap size will be filled on how much. Every time there's a debate for the Egyptian state is going to be enabled to pay their dues, this needs to be assured based on our plan. God willing, we are only waiting to have a biggest number of the offering to be announced soon. If you allow me, Mr. Premier, as mentioning the offering issue, you've already mentioned before that we are targeting to collect $2 billion before the end of this fiscal year. My question, what has been achieved of such a target? In addition, that I've already reviewed the 23-24 balance sheet to collect, the Ministry of Finance is targeted to collect 70 billion Egyptian pound of the offering, mostly $2.1 billion. Are they all the same or is it different? We've already said that we've targeted in the 3rd of June. As I said, that God willing, in a very short while, we're going to announce to the amount we've already achieved at the end of the 3rd of June. But Mr. Minister talked about what's in the following fiscal year. It represents a percentage of the return coming from the offering, not the total of the offering. There's a number of these companies, according to the offering plan, isn't it provided that the ministry to take all the value of the return. I mean, that is our target, that the offering will be higher than the figure taken by the Ministry of Finance. That's why I want to say that based on our plan is clear and laid out. That's why we've already, we're talking about one of the Supreme Council of Investments resolution that we found at the whole group. There are problems according to the existed or the laws in place to have a central unit of the cabinet to have a very committed resolution in order to escalate the measures of the offering. It is known that the cabinet tackled all the hard files, and the other issue with respect to the Supreme Council of Investment, the resolutions considered or are in a roadmap of the cabinet, and this could be like a golden chance for the investors. But the issue could be for how to deal with such decrees through some of the employees in government and governorates and ministries. Thank you. As you already said, there are laws in place. Reality exploited a difference of executions between a government to another. That's why a detailed resolution will be circulated, such as a return of improvement, service improvement. This each entity all these could be different from another, from a government to another. So God willing, all these regulative matters will be announced shortly. I need just to add what have been said by our colleagues, that it is most importantly for each minister to follow all of their resolutions regarding the measurement. Sometimes we face that some of the public servants would interpret their resolution that they may contain some difficulties or challenges, but what I need to assure you, the speed and the encouragement, it is important to overcome, or through which to overcome these difficulties. It is importantly that the more we go to the process of digitalization, the more you minimize the direct engagements between the public servant and the investors. So whoever wants to establish a company through this platform will be facilitate the measurements. A large part of services of the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Communications, of reaches like where about 200 services are in the Egypt's portal of digital services. We'll take the last question, please. Mr. Premier. Mohammed Ibrahim from Al Dastur newspaper. We cannot deny what the government measurements since you've been in the office. Let me just direct you a question of the regular and the normal citizen. What is in it for them while they are suffering from the increase of prices for the main goods? Let me just tell you, the more you inflow investment, i.e., it means that you entering or inflowing in the foreign currency in Egypt, so we'll be having no problem. So the Egyptian pound will be valued in its real value. But currently, currently the Egyptian pound is estimated in lower value as a result of the shortage of the foreign currency. There is an aggregation of estimating the foreign currency, though if the Egyptian wants or upon the entrance of the foreign investment, we have no problem to underestimate the value of the Egyptian pound, and will be have the second thing. Operation opportunities, and I hope from all Egyptians not to forget the comment that we are increasing once more. I see this simply, if I'm the population of Egypt is fixed for the upcoming 20 years, such as in Europe, we'll be having a very we'll be having this problem, and we'll be having at least low pressure on it. But we'll be facing problems every year in order to create job opportunities. But that's why the state's space and its mobility is just to provide job opportunities. So what we are doing today for the private sector to go with us with the same space to create more opportunities would reflect any young man or woman entering the labor market. It would be easy for them in order to tackle the issue of inflation. So it is important for the people to know how much they would benefit from our resolution, and I would like to assure you that we'll be having a very close follow-up to be executed on the ground, and will be having a follow-up by Mr. President through his presidency of the Supreme Council of Investment. I'd like to thank you for being here. Thank you.